Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm very honored today to be joined by Brett Larson. Brett works for W.L. Gore and Associates, the organization that's responsible for the invention and the distribution of the material Goretex in all of its forms around the world. And I'm sure most of you at home have probably come across that wonderful material at some point. Brett's got a really interesting background. He really started at the manufacturing floor level as a manufacturing lead before moving into other positions in the organization, including being the manager of factories, being a plant leader, and ultimately moving into business operations. And his current role with the organization is in leadership development in that manufacturing business. He's also the head of an organization called Synaptic Leadership Development, and we're going to explore quite a bit today about where he's going with that and what that means. He's also the author of an upcoming book called Leaders with a capital L. And this book is going to explore servant leadership and how that can lead to high performance teams. I'm really excited to see where our conversation goes today and to pick from Brett's experiences about what it means to develop these high performance teams. So, Brett, please introduce yourself to our audience, give a little bit more about your background, and tell us what led you to be with us today.
Thanks, Mick. I sure appreciate being here and having this opportunity. So out of college, I graduated as an industrial engineer, but pretty early on, I realized that was not my passion, that I wanted to lead and work with people. And so since about 1989 to about 2019, I was a leader in some form or another at various levels. You already described that. I was also a black belt in the Six Sigma program. So I got a good background in problem solving and project management. And one of the things I realized as I led teams is the thing that fed me is helping people grow and develop and seeing them be successful. And so in 2017, I started to pursue that a little bit more, and I became certified as a professional coach. And then we had an opportunity at Gore open up in 2019 for a more dedicated leadership development program manager serving our manufacturing community. And so I started to actually take a PhD program on organizational leadership. And after a few classes, I realized that that was a little bit too time consuming, but I was privileged to have access to a ton of great research on leaders and on leadership development programs. And so that investigation, that research kind of led me to come up with what I think is a fairly unique approach to leadership development that isn't traditional. And we've been applying that approach within Gore Medical Products Division manufacturing now for 2.5 years, 3 years. And so what's unique about that approach is essentially, instead of a traditional approach is where you have a cohort program and you pull leaders in from throughout the organization and you deliver content, and then they take that content back to their work environment and they try to apply it. And then they go back to class and the cycle repeats itself. And typically leadership development programs, a lot of them also utilize competency models, and they look at, one that I'm familiar with has 18 different competencies to assess leaders by. And what I found in the research is competency models really don't work that well. They don't show business results. But what is critically important, what is correlated with high performance leaders, is emotional intelligence. And we didn't have kind of a dedicated emotional intelligence class or program. And so that is kind of the cornerstone of our approach to leadership development, as well as we don't just pull leaders in, but we talk about the value in the program, and we wait for leaders to say, hey, we want to develop our team of leaders. Can you come and work with us? And so it's a pull. Leaders are very busy people. And I think that pull is really important because they're motivated to learn, they're motivated to apply, and it allows me and my team to serve their needs, to go to them to see what are their unique challenges. And in addition to emotional intelligence training, what else can we provide that addresses their specific needs? So those are some things that we're doing that's unique, that'll be in the book. Really, what's interesting, Mick, and I'm sure you'll realize this, is it's wonderful to talk about what makes a good leader and to help grow leaders, because when you talk about those things, you have to embody those. You can't just have your words mean something and your behavior means something else. So when I talk about servant leaders, I need to be a service provider to leaders to be able to be in integrity with the model that I'm speaking to. So that's what we try and do with our leadership development program.
So Brett, at the Leadership Project, our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo and to rethink what it means to be a leader. So I love that you've stopped and you've paused and you've reflected on what is working and what's not working. And I'm really interested to unpack a little bit more shortly about some of those things that you discovered about what was working and what you decided to do differently to address what was not working. But what I'm interested to start with is, was there a particular moment in time during your career where you stopped and thought, well, maybe leadership needs to change?
Well, I think that so leadership in general, the role of leadership, I don't know that I looked at it that broadly until I've been in this role. Obviously, I've had some leaders that have been excellent, and I've had some leaders that haven't. And so from a specific standpoint, I've done a lot of assessing and trying to provide feedback. I think I'm one of those employees that probably is hard on a leader, because I've developed a comfort. I've done really scary things, and I'm still here to talk about it. So I've developed a comfort with being somewhat courageous. And so one of my beliefs is that you can't complain about something. You can't be frustrated about something unless you try to do something about it. And so I've tried to give feedback, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I will say that in this role, and looking through research and then comparing it to what I see as a leadership development program, I do scratch my head a little bit about the whole field of leadership development and why it seems to be still fairly traditional. And I need to humble myself a little bit here. I am not the world's authority on leadership development programs, but things like emotional intelligence is a great example. Mick, you have it in your mission as well. I'm surprised. A lot of research shows how important emotional intelligence is for leaders. I'm surprised that leadership development programs don't have emotional intelligence as a foundational standard. So that would be one example. I'm not sure I answered your question, but
no, that's okay. It helps us with an exploration of where we'll go our conversation, Brett. And one of the things that I'm really admiring there, so you're humble, and we're going to talk about humble shortly, the word humble as well. You're humble enough to say, okay, you're not an expert, but you're also seeing that you wanted to do something different. You wanted to question, why are we doing these traditional approaches and what's missing here? And there's lots of different threads I want to unpack, and I think let's do them kind of one at a time. You mentioned before about cohort-based approaches, but very specifically, the idea that you might have, I don't know, 20 different departments across your organization, or you might have people from different organizations, and you're going to pick one person out of a team, send them off on a program, and expect them to come back transformed. Tell me more about what you think was working about that and what wasn't working.
Yeah, excellent. Well, so some of the benefits of that are you develop relationships across the organization. So you can then run something that a challenge you're facing with another leader who's in a different part of the organization and not have to worry so much about confidentiality and exposing people. So you do develop a network of peers with programs like that. Another benefit is it's standard material, so everyone sees the same material, and there's benefits to that. And additionally, it's probably more efficient than my approach because you've got a standard class and you just pull people in, you deliver content, and you go to the next class. Whereas the approach that I'm using and that we're using, it's not just me too. I have a team that we run ideas past each other and so on. But our approach is much more getting embedded in that with that leader and with their team that they're leading. So what we want to do is, again, it's a pull. We sit with the leader, we take measurements on the current environment through various standard surveys. And then we sit down and we review those measurements and we identify opportunities. And so every area will be different, but we kind of partner with that leader and then we pull their team in. And a lot of the leaders, all of the leaders I'm working with, will have 2 or 3 levels of leaders that they are responsible for, that they lead. And so there's actually, it's built in, there's a team of about, from the entry-level leader to the leader that I'm partnering with, there's a team of anywhere from 18 to 20 or 8 to 20 leaders. And so we could go through emotional intelligence training together and they can, learn about themselves and learn about each other and develop some capability in disagreeing and pushing back and challenging and in creating a really high quality culture within their leadership team because they're going through this together.
Okay, very, very interesting. I want to come back and talk about some of the mechanics of it in a moment. Just want to share with you some of the things that I heard. So in those cohort-based programs, there are some advantages of it. And part of it is the diversity of thought.
Yes.
Hearing from other people, from other backgrounds, from other experiences. I like what you said about the confidentiality. They get into a removed environment. But then that's also the negative as well, isn't it? Because in that environment where it's removed from the context of the day-to-day operations, it's no longer contextual. And it's very difficult for one person. Let's say they go on a conference. It doesn't have to be a training program. It's very difficult for one person in your company to go on a conference, learn something magical, and come back and change the world. It's very difficult.
Yeah, that was an additional point that I think is a challenge because leaders are busy people. And to take what they've learned and bring it back into their environment, especially if their environment is with a lot of other leaders, and then try to apply it. They both have to teach everyone. Everyone has to clear their schedule, learn the concept, and then apply it, having learned it secondhand. So the application, I think, is a little bit challenging in that kind of a setup as well.
One of the things I heard John C. Maxwell talk about recently, and I think it picks on some learnings from Glass's pyramid here, that a lot of learning is experiential as well.
Yeah.
So you learn by experiencing something, remembering that experience, remembering the emotions that came with that experience. So the person that goes off to an amazing transformational conference where they've had some kind of movement within themselves, and then they go back to the organization and they try to regale everything that they learned at that conference, it falls flat because the people that they're talking to didn't experience what that person experienced. They didn't feel the emotions that that person felt. Whereas if you did it all together, you feel that experience and you feel that emotion together. So I think that's some of the unpicking the science of what you're getting at here, Brett. I think it's really interesting.
Yes. And just to touch on that point, if I might, it's a great point because, we talk about, I forget what the source is, but one source says 70% of learning is experiential, 20 is partnering and learning from another, and 10 is classroom. So if 70% is experiential, how does the leadership development community hope to make a lot of progress in developing leaders when a lot of what they're doing is teaching concept in a classroom environment? So one key piece of how we engage with leaders in development is we also implement a process that's a succession planning process that I'm sure many companies have something similar. But this process, I think, is really important because essentially it's leaders sitting down at least every quarter and identifying those people that are candidates for leadership or for the next role of leadership. And this team discusses each candidate against a very broad set of guidelines, and they assess where they need to grow and develop. And then they together identify experiential opportunities that one of them could go back and have a conversation with the developee and say, hey, know you're interested in leadership development. I think that, or the team has discussed this, and we think that one of your limitations might be on your ability to have difficult conversations. How does that feel to you? And they have a conversation. And when there's disagreement, that's awesome. They can find the truth in there and come up with a new plan. But when there's agreement, then they are able to identify the experiences that would help that person develop that skill. And so it's a process where multiple leaders, not just one leader, we all have biases. And one way to kind of limit our bias is to have multiple people input. So it's multiple people assessing somebody and what their growth opportunities are. It's conversations with that person on how they can improve and grow and develop and what experiences are available. And then it's the team of leaders also being calibrated on, hey, we talked about Mick. Mick had this opportunity. And so anybody then can see, oh gosh, I just saw him have an interaction. I want to talk to him about that because I think, that's what we were talking about. I think it could have been better. So, I mean, it's a concept of it takes a village to raise a child. And so if you have a group of leaders supporting development of future leaders, that's a pretty powerful thing. So.
Yeah, I really like what I'm hearing, Brett, around this kind of coaching. It's kind of collaborative coaching almost, and a learning mindset based on collaborative learning. So it's collaborative coaching, collaborative learning with a learning mindset. It's really interesting. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you might be ahead of the game here. And I'll explain that a little bit further. Very recent announcement by Professor Peter Hawkins and David Clutterbuck, creating something called the World Team Coaching Institute. And they're taking a series of executive coaches, life coaches, leadership coaches that have all been coaching people in a one-on-one environment and pivoting it to the point where you're coaching an entire team, not just the leader.
Fantastic.
Hmm.
I will, are you going to put them in your link? Because I would
do.
love to look them up. Thank you.
Very much in its infancy, but everything I've read about it so far, they're onto something, and you're onto something, Brett. You're really onto something here. Okay, let's explore a little bit further. In that environment where you do have lots of different team members, how do you cultivate the right psychologically safe environment and the right culture to make it successful and value-adding?
That is a really complex question, but it's a great one. One of the things that's wonderful about Gore is that we are very clear on our values. We in a quite detailed way, define what's important to us and what a Gore associate, what's expected out of a Gore associate. So that definition of our values creates kind of that foundation to build the house on. And it aligns very well with wanting engagement, wanting challenge, wanting, one of our values is the power of small teams, as a matter of fact. So having identified that those values as a background is a great place to then talk to people about, so how do we now create psychological safety? And in fact, I think emotional intelligence is just so important because we first have to be aware of ourselves and be able to manage ourselves so that we don't just fly off the handle, have an emotional reaction and not even recognize that we had that. But, okay, I had an emotional reaction. What was that about? What would I do differently? And that self-management is the second component of emotional intelligence. So the ability to be aware of yourself and how you are impacting others, and then be aware of others' emotions and their reaction to you, and so on. Those skills enable you then to create, I think, an environment that's psychologically safe. So we go through emotional intelligence, and then we brainstorm on how do you create an environment with psychological safety, and everyone kind of participates in that. And so that becomes kind of a blueprint for individual teams. Some of the things that I recommend, though, is upfront with your team, you ought to set the expectation. Hey, we want challenge. We want independent thought. We want you to be a business owner and to not be afraid to speak your mind. So you can state that up front. In fact, I give a presentation called the Power of Constructive Conflict, where I say, if I'm a leader and I share a plan with you as my team, if you all agree, what have I learned? I'm not sure I've learned anything except maybe there's agreement, but maybe not. If one member of the team disagrees with me, what have I learned? Well, I learned that they're thinking critically. I learned I can probably trust them because they're going to speak their mind. We've all learned together their perspective, which is different. It also has engaged everyone now in thinking more deeply about the issue, and we get to a better solution. And it's all because somebody had the guts to challenge. And so that's one thing, you set that expectation. 2, you talk about the value of challenge. Then 3, when somebody disagrees with me in the meeting and I'm on my game, I love to say, Mick, thank you so much for challenging me on that. Everyone, please notice. Really appreciate the independent thought and the challenge that Mick had, because this is not easy. But I hope that everyone feels comfortable enough to challenge each other as we get to a better place. Now let's talk about what Mick suggested. So I want to also make us much more aware, emotionally aware of our team dynamics, because there's individual emotional intelligence and there's team emotional intelligence, and we try to grow both. So did that answer your question on how to kind of
so completely
psychological safety? Okay.
Yeah, so completely. And I want to summarize it a little bit for the audience, the things that I took away from that. And I'd like you to reflect and tell me whether I've summarized it well, Brett. So the first thing is everything was rooted in values.
Yes.
Having those values from the outset as the foundation of your house is really important. The next part, and you didn't quite say this, but I think it's important to add, is living by those values and that your actions match what your values say. And this time, I'm going to borrow from another person in the John C. Maxwell family, which is Mark Cole. One of his favorite sayings I've heard him say is, your organization's got a plaque problem. There's a plaque on the wall that says what the values are, but you're not living those values, right? So you need to live those values. If you have those values, if you live those values, you're then starting to establish trust. And trust can then be the building block upon which what Brett is talking about. On the emotional intelligence front, it does start with that self-awareness, understanding what your own emotional triggers are, and then being able to self-manage. I want to be careful with this one, because what you want to be able to do with your emotions is to control them for a virtuous outcome. That means sometimes you want to completely control that emotion. Other times you actually may want it to bubble to the surface, but very purposefully, not a erratic emotion. You don't want the situation where people are whispering around going, hey, is the boss in a good mood today? That's the worst thing. That means that you're not in control of those emotions. Then what Brett is then saying, if the leader has enough self-awareness to understand the emotional triggers and enough self-management to control those emotions, he's then establishing essentially a blame-free culture where people can speak their mind openly because they know that the leader is going to listen. They're going to pay attention, and they're going to pay attention without judgment. Now you're starting to build that psychological safety. And what I loved in the example that Brett showed is the way he reflected it back to the whole group. It was like a fuel. It was an encouragement. The example that he gave in his story was, oh, thank you so much, Mick. Team, this is what we want. We want to challenge each other. We want to be able to have these conversations. And then you're building a virtuous cycle, because now everyone feels that they've got a voice. They feel that their opinions matter. They feel like they matter. And you can start building that environment of psychological safety. How was that?
Thank you, Mick. That's beautiful. And I would like to add a couple of things. One is you talked about judgment, and that's a really key piece in all this. When you judge, you kind of create space, you create a distance between you and others. I like to think of it as data. It's all just data. And let's figure out what to do with it. It's not good or bad, it just is. So that's one piece. Another, and plus this applies to ourselves too. We're the worst enemies of ourselves. No one could be as rude to ourselves as sometimes our inner critic is, you know? And so stop judging yourself. At the end of the day, I'll think about the day and I'll go, oh God, why did I do that? And then I'll catch myself judging and I'll go, stop. What did I do? What's the learning? What would I do differently? Let it go.
Nice.
So that is a key word. The second thing is Um, I want to just make a point because you do this so amazingly well. You are a terrific listener. Listening, who goes to listening school? Who goes to listening class? Why don't they teach leaders how to listen? Because it is such a powerful way to tell people that they matter. And you do a terrific job of it. And I would encourage any leader out there or anybody to improve your listening skills. And the third thing is I wanted to share an example, an experience that is pretty profound on what the value is when somebody disagrees or somebody points out and challenges. I was in a team meeting with my team. There was probably 8 of us ish, and in the course of the meeting, we were discussing how to solve a problem, and various people had various ideas, and I was kind of a little bit spacing out, a little bit daydreaming. And then somebody said a solution, and I said, "Oh boy, I think that's a terrific idea." And then one of the people that I lead said, "Oh, that's great, Brett. Hannah had that idea 5 minutes ago." What, you don't hear it if it's from a woman? And I looked over at Hannah and said, "Hannah, is that true?" And she smiled and nodded. And Murray pointing this out gave me the wonderful opportunity for everyone, not just me, but to be self-aware that I missed it, to apologize. I said, "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry, Hannah. Everyone, the next great ideas are Hannah's ideas. Let's overcompensate." And also in that moment, I was able to say, "Thank you so much, Murray, for pointing that out. I had no idea I was doing it." And I know that men, the generalization is that we don't hear women. We don't listen to women enough. And so you're pointing this out helps us all be sensitive to that. So it was just a beautiful opportunity because Murray challenged me.
Thank you so much for that amazing illustration. That was perfect. Yeah. And can I say to you that it's also an example that you've created a psychologically safe environment. Otherwise, Murray wouldn't have felt safe to tell you, right? So there's a positive there as well. And it can happen, by the way. We're all human beings. There are times where you can lose focus in a meeting. And I love that you were able to just apologize and move on from there. What I most like about what you've just shared, it's a beautiful segue for everyone in our audience to think about this for a moment. Everything that Brett is describing is one of the keys to unlocking diversity and inclusion in your business. By having these environments where everyone feels like they can speak their mind and speak up, you're encouraging diversity of thought. So you need to surround yourself with a group of people from diverse backgrounds, whatever that might mean to you: race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, trade qualification versus someone that's in finance, etc. Like, surround yourself with people with diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences. Give them the environment where they feel comfortable and safe, that they can express their opinions and their experiences in a way where they feel valued and they feel listened to and they feel like they matter. That then creates inclusion, because no one feels excluded. Everyone feels like they have that opportunity to speak their mind and they feel like they're part of something bigger. So just a beautiful, beautiful example, Brett. What are your reflections on what I'm saying about D&I there? So the diversity and inclusion element of that, is that your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think psychological safety is a kind of another way to state inclusion. If people feel safe, they're going to share their perspective. So yes, I think that is it's you don't create inclusion by talking about it, or diversity or equity either. You do it by behavior. And one thing too I'd like to share is that this, I know, Mick, one of your visions is to work with leaders that is their first experience as a leader. And that's a challenging place because you're probably a new leader because you are a great individual performer. You get things done, you solve problems, you've got a great skill set. And now when you're a leader, you can't do it all yourself. That's not your job anymore. You have to back up and make room for others. And that can be intimidating a little bit. I've lost control or whatever. But I will say to you that the few teams that I've led where we've finally gotten to a great place where we can challenge each other freely, that is the most satisfying, rewarding environment ever. It's not scary to be challenged. It's not scary for somebody to disagree with me. It's a wonderful thing because now you're all just feeding off each other. And what I've found is I also get a lot less fires coming to my door. We got a problem with this because I'm not making all the decisions. We're all doing it. So we have a lot of resources around the table. And if they came to me, it's just because other people weren't available and it's something they hadn't seen before. So it makes life and it makes work so much more rewarding if you can achieve that.
And that's what we all want, Brett. We all want to work for an organization where our work is understood, where we're rewarded for what we do, where it's a rewarding experience because we feel like we're making a positive impact and a contribution. Just wonderful. Okay, I'd like to segue into some of the programs now that you've developed and unpick those a little bit more. So I promised earlier that we would come back to the word humble. And I'm sure everyone in the audience is scratching their head going, why is humble such an important word? And humility is a very important aspect of any leader, by the way. But you've used the word humble in a different way. So please tell us about the Humble Development Program.
Thank you. That's just the moniker that I've placed on the 7-step process that we use to develop leaders. And humble stands for the HUM is human, the first 3 letters of human. The B is based, and the LE in humble is leadership. So it's human-based leadership or humble development, human-based leadership development. So that's the moniker. And one of the books that kind of changed my leadership life was the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. And what was really cool about that book is that they just looked at data and said, these are the highest performing companies over time. Now let's figure out why. And even though Jim didn't want to have the answer be leaders, when they investigated, that was probably the top reason is, hey, all these leaders had similar qualities. And the 2 qualities they had is a driven for success of the organization, not personal success, but success of the organization. And the second one was a level of humility that invited everyone else to participate and to play. And that's why I think over time, these organizations were so effective, because the humble leader creates everyone else as a leader so that when they're gone, other people pick up the slack because they've been, participating fully all along the way. So humble, I think, is a really powerful word and a powerful attribute for leaders.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's, and it speaks volumes because it means something, human-based leadership. And then at the same time, bringing in that element of humility immediately there.